I have an idea worth spreading, that all children and youth are capable of success, no exceptions. Now that flies at the face of wisdom, conventional wisdom, that says some kids will do well, some kids will do okay and probably make it, and some kids will fall through the cracks. So how can someone stand up here and say all children and youth are capable of success, no exceptions, when we know better? Or do we? So we set out to prove that all kids are capable of success without exception. Back in 1993, we brought together a group of researchers and practitioners to study what we then knew as the youth at risk paradigm, why some kids did well and other kids struggled. And we thought that that expression was abused, misused, and maligned. That if we're going to put a label on a child, give them a label of hope. Give them a label of success or possibilities or opportunities, but why label them at risk? And sometimes we didn't even know the children, we only knew the conditions they came from. So we called our research project Kids at Hope to distinguish it from youth at risk. And as we got into the research part of it, we believed that we could change the world. We had an idea worth spreading, but we had to believe it, and then we had to practice it. Because sometimes we believe in things and don't practice them, and sometimes we practice things that we don't believe in. For example, I believe in good nutrition and exercise. I believe it with all my heart. It's the practice part that I have difficulty with. We also practice things that we don't believe in. I have a favorite sandwich shop in my hometown, and every time I go to that sandwich shop, someone, when I walk in through the doors, says welcome, but never looks me in the eye, never smiles. It doesn't come across genuine or authentic, but somebody must have said, we practice good customer service. See, it has to be genuine and authentic when you practice it. It has to be genuine and authentic when you believe that all children are capable of success, no exceptions. So to get from believing it, we have to kind of change our mindset from being a realist to becoming a genius. Now, many adults will claim that they're realists, and certainly proud of that fact. I've never heard a young person claim that they're a realist. So that must be an adult onset disease. So what's the difference between a realist and a genius? Well, a realist is someone who predicts the future based on the past. And a genius is someone who creates a future that doesn't exist. See, all of us have the possibilities of creating a future that doesn't exist if we give ourselves permission to do so. See, I know a little bit about the difference between genius and realist because I realized 10 years ago I was married to a realist. Now, I've been happily married to this woman for 46 years. If she was beside me today, she would look you straight in the eye and says she's been happily married for 6 months. And then she would add that they're not consecutive. She remembers an hour and a half in 1983, 2 hours and 37 minutes in 2001, but they add up to 6 months. But I discovered 10 years ago that she was a realist. And how did I discover it? Well, Grandma Butchie, her real name is Esther, but known to friends and family as Grandma Butchie, was watching our then 3-year-old grandson, Jacob Emilio. Jacob Emilio had just finished watching the video Peter Pan. After watching the video, Peter Pan, what do you think our 3-year-old grandson thought he could do? He thought he could fly. So Jacob Emilio jumps up on top of the couch. He yells over to Grandma, "Grandma, watch me fly." But Grandma's a realist. So she yells back to Jacob Emilio, "Don't jump off the couch, you'll fall down and break your arm, break your leg, undeviate your deviated septum." But Jacob Emilio now believes he is Peter Pan. So he gets on top of the couch, he yells over to Grandma, "Grandma, watch me fly." And Jacob Emilio then does what? He doesn't jump off the couch, he flies off the couch. He lands safely on the floor. He spreads out his arms. He looks up at Grandma and says, "But Grandma, it feels so good to fly." See, I hope he doesn't lose that possibility that he can make wonderful things happen, because that's what geniuses do. They make wonderful things happen, things that are unimaginable to realists. But that's what geniuses do. And I believe that one day when I take Jacob to the Grand Canyon at 18 years of age, he's not going to say, "Papa, watch me." But like the Wright brothers, he may discover he can't personally fly, but he finds a way to fly. And that's what geniuses seem to do that realists don't understand, that they don't give up until they find a way to fly, to find a vaccine for polio, to find a vaccine for smallpox, to land a man on the moon, to think about putting a man on Mars, to not give up until they find a way to find a cure for cancer. See, those of us that serve young people in education and child welfare and the juvenile justice system, our goal is like the cancer researcher. We don't give up until we find a way to help every child succeed, no exceptions. See, nobody here wants to support somebody in cancer research that doesn't believe they can find a way to find that cure. Nobody wants to support anyone in education, and child welfare, and youth development, or child development, or the juvenile justice system that doesn't believe they can find a way to help every child succeed. No exceptions. See, we learned from Peter Pan that the moment you stop believing that you can fly, you cease forever to be able to try to do it. The moment you cease believing that all children are capable of success, no exceptions, you cease forever to try to help all kids succeed, no exceptions. So we have to change our paradigms. We have to unshackle ourselves from this belief that we're realists, that we can predict the future based on our past experiences, to that of creating a future that doesn't exist for all children. So I'm going to see if, in fact, we can kind of experiment with that this morning, to see if, in fact, you have the capacity to unleash the inner genius that you've been blessed with, the 86 billion brain cells that we have as a species to be able to create a world that doesn't exist. So my experiment begins with a story. I have a friend that was born in prison. His mother was 17 years old, unmarried. His father was killed by a shotgun blast 2 months before his birth. If you know a person born in prison, mother 17 years old, unmarried, father killed by a shotgun blast before he was born, would you consider that young person at risk or at hope? Conventional wisdom is probably screaming at you right now and said, if there's ever a definition for an at-risk kid, I must have just given it to you. But let me ask you the genius question. What does the boy need you to see him as? At risk or at hope? Are you willing to put him in a liability column and write him off as a potential deficit? Or can you see the promise that a young newborn child offers the world? See, my friend was ultimately put into foster care. For the next 14 years, he was physically, emotionally, and sexually abused. If you know a kid living in foster care almost every single day for 14 years, abused in some way, shape, form, or another, would you consider that kid at risk or at hope? Conventional wisdom is screaming in your ears again, saying that has to be an at-risk kid. Except when I ask you the genius question. What does the boy need you to see him as? He still can't afford for you to write him off. My young friend was taken out of foster care. He was put into a reform school. He spent 2 years in reform school. They emancipate him at age 17 and a half. They give him $66. They send him home, and they tell him to have a good life. My friend is now living on the streets, homeless and penniless. If you know a young man living on the streets at 17 and a half, homeless, penniless, 2 years before that in reform school, 14 years before that in foster care, and comes into this world in prison, would you consider that young person at risk or at hope? And yet, that young man still needs you to see him at hope. See, my friend is someone called Antwone Fisher. You may have seen his movie. It was produced in 2002. And it's a story of a young man that I just described, but let me bring you up to date. My friend is now 59 years old. He's a world-renowned poet. He's a best-selling author. He's a screenwriter, a prize-winning producer, director. He's a wonderful husband. He's a terrific dad. He's a pretty good artist. He loves to garden, and he likes to give back to his community. If you know someone that does all that, would you consider that person at risk or at hope? And yet it's the same person. So how does someone go from the depths of hopelessness to the heights of achievement? How does that happen? And isn't that worth our examination? Isn't it worth us to research that, to understand the dynamics that help a child move from hopelessness to hopefulness? So this is what we learned in that 7-year research review to better understand the dynamics of hope and risk. We have become experts in risk, but we really didn't understand hope. So our first finding was it wasn't the risk that held kids back from success. It wasn't the risk factors. It was the absence of hope. We also learned that we don't control most of the risk that children experience, but we control most of the hope. See, all the risk factors that were excuses as to why these kids may not succeed didn't seem to be the independent variable that allowed them to overcome that adversity, those conditions. It was when we as adults offered a child a sense of hope, became the factor that moved them from a life of hopelessness to a life of hopefulness. We learned this fact, that hope is taught and learned. You learn hope like you learn reading, writing, math, and science. Like you learned what shoe to put on what foot, how to tie your laces. You learn hope like you learn all the other skills and knowledge that were offered during our lives. So who teaches our children about hope? And can you teach something that you don't know? See, if you don't know how to read, you can't teach a child to read. If you don't know how to tie your shoes, you can't teach a child to tie their shoes. If you yourself aren't a hopeful person, how do you help a child become hopeful, especially a child that's living under the conditions of risk? So we understand now, not only do you create kids at hope, but equal to that, we have to create adults at hope. And programs that we've been looking for since the 1960s, if we could just find the right program for these children, something transformational should happen. And now we understand it's not the programs that make a difference, it's the adult relationships. You can't just plop a child in a 6-week or 12-week or 6-month program and expect something remarkable to happen to help them go from risk to hope. How that happens is when there's an adult who creates a meaningful, sustainable relationship with our children. See, we've been studying hope for a long time, and we have a pretty good understanding of this dynamic, this powerful expression called hope. Now, hope is beyond a feeling. Hope is a strategy. It actually has DNA. So let's put it underneath the microscope and come up with a definition so we can have a discussion about hope. So here's where we've come from in terms of defining hope. Hope is the ability to visit your future. It's the mental process of seeing a future that doesn't exist, but imagining it so that you can prepare to achieve what it is that you already saw in your mind's eye. One of the challenges we had in our research project is to define what a future is. And we went beyond the conventional wisdom of the day, which was, what do you want to be when you grow up? What do you want to be when you grow up? What do you want to be when you grow up seemed to limit what we as adults know is a multidimensional life. So we talked to them about home and family. What type of home and family do they want? How do they want to give back to their community through community service? What fun would they like to have? How would they express the quality of life through hobbies and recreation? And yes, we talk about education, career. We talk about 4 destinations, not just one. Give a chance for a child to see the full value of life. So hope is the ability to visit your future, return to the present, and prepare for the journey. Some kids can do that, some kids can't. Kids that can't, we define those kids as suffering from terminal thinking. Terminal thinking becomes hopelessness. This process is what we call mental time travel. The ability for the brain to process and forecast its future. Mental time travel. Kids who learn mental time travel become hopeful. And who teaches them that process? We, the adults in their lives. This is important because the Gallup student poll that's been studying kids for the past 4 years and have committed to studying children for the next 6 years, a 10-year research effort to understand whether our kids are growing up hopeful or not. And in the first 4 years, they've defined that about half of the kids are in fact growing up hopeful. Half the kids haven't learned to be hopeful yet. I wonder where they're growing up. I wonder what their families and schools and community-based organizations look like. I wonder if they're teaching these kids how to be hopeful because they need that strength, they need that strategy, they need that dynamic. See, if you're not hopeful, and these are kids grades 5 through 12 across the United States, if you're not hopeful, then this happens to you, become disengaged in school. See, hope gives you the reason to go to school, to get up in the morning, to try, to have goals, to have pathways, to put gas in your own gas tank. But if you don't have hope, why approach life in an optimistic, possible way? So we're finding kids are disengaging. 50% of kids grades 5 through 12 across the United States are not engaged. 19% of the 50% are actively disengaged, which means they're going out of their way to sabotage their education and others around them. You shouldn't be surprised. If they're not hopeful, why would they be engaged in their schoolwork? When we see kids leaving the formal education system, we pick them up at age 16 and we follow them for the next 8 years to age 24. And now we're discovering that 1 in 7 of these kids are disconnecting from the institutions and organizations that were designed to help them prepare for their future. See, who's teaching our children about hope? And are there the adults in their life who are hopeful people that understand the strength, the possibilities, the strategy around hope? 1 in 7 of our youngsters, grades 16 to 24, are disconnected educationally, economically, socially, emotionally. So Kids with Hope came up with a strategy that wasn't a program strategy, but a cultural strategy. Building a culture for these kids to be able to grow, because cultures allow you to grow. This is not a program. See, programs are implemented, but cultures, you grow. And the culture we're trying to grow is a culture where every child succeeds, no exceptions. The culture we've created to date is a culture where some kids do well, some kids struggle and make it, and some kids fall through the cracks. See, we can create a future that doesn't exist. We can create a future that we believe all children will succeed, no exceptions. And we do it first and foremost by first believing in our kids. Not some of our kids, not a few of our kids, all of our kids without exception. That's our first universal truth. That's going to create the foundation to this cultural framework we're going to build. The second universal truth is kids succeed when they have these meaningful, sustainable relationships with caring adults. We're going to track whether our kids are connected with adults. If we track their absences and their tardies and their test scores and their grades and their excused absences and their unexcused absences, if we're willing to track all that, should we not track whether or not these kids have people in their lives who they can count on? And yet we know about 50% of them don't have people. They're in programs. They're engaged in school. They have a curriculum. They're delivered a lesson plan, but they're just not connecting. And that's what we as human beings do. We connect with each other. Those of us that are connected in meaningful ways seem to do better in life than when we're disconnected, when we grow up anonymously. And the third universal truth that we discovered in building this framework is that kids succeed when they're able to articulate their future in 4 destinations: home and family, education and career, community service, hobbies and recreation. When kids learn to mentally time travel, when they can forecast their future, return to the present, and prepare for what they've just seen, then you have a hopeful child. And kids who can't do that, you have a child who's suffering from terminal thinking or hopelessness. See, the blueprint in a culture is something you carry in your head. It's not a curriculum, it's not a handbook, it's not a manual, it's not a procedure, it's not a program. It's a framework, it's a belief system. And at the bottom of the belief system, you put the child in the middle of it, and you frame them with your hands. And the first part of it, you say, I believe in you. I believe all kids can succeed, no exceptions. The second part is you connect with them. We understand that there's 4 ways to connect. We call that the 4 ACEs: anchor parent, other caring adults, people with high expectations for kids, and people who create opportunities for kids to experience success. What a great person you are in a child's life if you're that person who creates opportunities for them to experience success. Because we know success breeds success. But equally, we know that failure breeds failure. And there's not an upside in failing a child. So as I look at you through this mental blueprint, I understand that I believe, I connect, and I time travel with each and every child I come into contact with. See, we're not denying that there's not risk in children's lives, not for a second. But we're saying it's time in the 21st century to balance it against hope. That we have to be not only experts in understanding risk, we have to be experts in understanding hope. See, people who have dreams, who are this remarkable individuals who have the ability to see a future that some of us want to see as well, but they're the ones that kind of articulate it for us in very effective ways and kind of give us an idea of how to get from point A to point B. Dr. King was one of those people. August 28, 1963, he offered a dream. Curiously enough, he didn't offer a plan, he offered a dream. He was able to see a world where his children would be judged by the content of their character, not by the color of their skin. See, our dream is not unlike Dr. King's dream in the 21st century, that one day our children would not judged by their risk factors, but by the hope in which we offer them. See, that's an idea worth spreading. Thank you.